Hi everyone, my name is Johan and welcome to Fire Biscuit Gaming. This is the channel where I share tips about programming and game programming in particular. If you like what you see, don't forget to like and subscribe. In this video, we're going to talk about how to use Unity Scriptable Objects to define the trigger conditions for the magic effects of your RPG. We will also be looking at how to use scriptable objects to define dynamic values that adjust based on the game state. First, let me give you a demonstration of conditional triggering of my effect. If you look at the game, I have 4 different stages of battle. Range, which is the default one we are on right now, block, attack, and then the after battle stage. In the range phase, I'm fighting this green enemy token, and I'm dragging the attack effect onto the enemy token, and you can see the enemy appears as dead below. Now if I remove the effect and I apply a condition using scriptable objects, so it's a defined condition on my effect, and I apply it again on the enemy, you can see that now the enemy is no longer dead. The trigger condition is you must be in the attack phase for this effect to trigger. If I remove the condition from the scriptable object inspector panel and then apply the effect again, you will see the enemy dies now. You noticed that I didn't have to modify the code to make this effect happen. So let's look at how the effect condition scriptable object is implemented. First, I start with an abstract class called effect condition, which extends scriptable object. And then I define one method called isMet, which returns a boolean based on some game-related parameters. I also have some utilities string functions to allow me to output the label of the condition on the UI so I can tell what it is. Now, to implement any type of condition, I just need to extend that class. So in that case, the condition from the demonstration was whether the effect was usable in one of the 4 battle phases. I called it a valid phase condition, and for every scriptable object, you can always have a create asset menu header here, which allows you to right-click in the Unity inspector and create the scriptable object based on this template or this class. So what does that class have? It just has a single property called evaluation phases, which is a serialized field with an array of all the phases that are valid for that effect. Then I implement my isMet method, which takes in my effect param. So the way the effect param works is when it's time to evaluate the conditions, I flatten my game state into what I call the state snapshot. And then I pass this as to all the effects, conditions, target, and other triggers. So they can just tap into it and grab the information that they need. In this case, I extract the state snapshot from the parameters and I check, do I have any restriction on which phase the effect can be used? If I don't have any, then I return true. That means the condition is met. And if I have any, I just iterate through each of them and I check that one of them matches the current state or the current phase that we are in right now in the battle. And if none are found, I just return false. That means the condition is not met. Now let's have a look at how it looks like in the Unity editor. So if you remember from my previous video, I was demonstrating how to create effects using scriptable objects. So here I'm highlighting the attack effect from just now. And you can see on the left in the editor, I have a empty array for all the effect conditions. All I need to do is right click, create effect condition, remember the create asset menu, and I can choose valid phase, which was the one I defined just now, and I call it condition and attack phase. Then I choose from my array of evaluation phases from earlier, if you remember this one. Alright, this is the field that is now highlighted here. I just choose that I want it valid only during the range phase, for example. Then I go back to my effect, drag and drop the condition into the array of conditions. And now my effect can only be executed during the attack phase, not other phase. And if I remove the condition, it will be executable at any time. So I can do drag and drop on the condition, or I can modify the condition directly. I can add multiple phases also if I want to. So this is ideal for non-programmers to be able to modify the parameters and the business logic of your game without having to write a bunch of code for it. And all this was only doable with 15 lines of code, which is the isMet condition you see here. Now let's look at how I call this method in my code, right? The isMet method. It's actually quite simple. I have my battle system where I will check every condition on the effect. Remember, the condition is an array of conditions, and for each condition I check whether the condition has been met or not. And I need to build that effect parameter that you've seen so far, and the way I do it is the entity that checks whether the effect is applicable to it or not takes the snapshot on the state and then creates an effect param using the state snapshot, and then tries to check if the effect condition has been met or not. And if it's met, it will be able to apply the effect. As you can see here, I just do a filtering of all the effects that are applicable for that entity, and the entity will then apply the effect to itself, for example, cancel its attack, or be hit by an attack of the player, or wound the player, and stuff like that. Let's have a look at the demo again. So I have the green goblin, and I'm in the range phase. I have no condition applied to my effect, so that means it can be used at any time. I take the effect, drag and drop onto the goblin, and the enemy is dead. Now I put it back, and then I drag and drop the condition I created earlier, which is restricted to the attack phase only, not the range phase. I drag and drop this into the array of conditions. So when you look at this here, now it's only during attack phase. When I take my effect, apply it on the enemy again, it's no longer dead. You can see that the description of the effect has been updated. It doesn't update automatically because I don't run the UI update at every frame. Instead, I do it based on an event when the game state has been recomputed. Here, the game state is recomputed when a new effect is applied to the goblin. So if I put it back and put it in, you can see the goblin doesn't die. Now if I remove the condition, I reevaluate the game state again. Now the goblin is dead. Again, I didn't need to write any more code to make that happen, besides the definition of the effect condition. Now, to demonstrate the usage of scriptable object to define dynamic values, I've set up the scene where I'm fighting a goblin again, same guy as just now, and I already took 3 damage from the previous battle. And I have a basic attack of 1, the goblin has a defense of 2, so I will not kill it with my basic attack. Now, if I remove the effect and apply a dynamic value based on the number of wounds that I have, then I apply the effect again, and now I have sufficient number of attack, which is 3, to destroy the enemy. And this was executed without touching the code, simply by manipulating the editor and drag and dropping the corresponding dynamic value into the editor slot. So what is a dynamic value? In the context of my game, what's the defense value of an enemy, attack value of the enemy or the player, and other parameters like this? You can hardcode them in your scriptable objects, or you can also add a dynamic value based on other game state. In the demonstration just now, the dynamic value was based on the number of wounds that I took as a player in the previous stages. First, I start by defining an abstract class called effect dynamic value, which extends a scriptable object class. And I define a additional field here, which is used for my game, called the effect modifier, which allows me to add more dynamic values and combine them together, which we will discuss in a moment. But the gist of it is I have a public method called getValue, which calls the abstract method called computeDynamicValue. To create the dynamic value for the number of wounds that the player takes, I just need to extend the effect dynamic value class. I called mine valued number of wounds. I always have my header create asset menu. Then I have here 2 serialized fields for indicating whether I need to include the wounds from the player, the wounds from the unit, or both. And I implement my compute dynamic value method, which takes in a effect parameter and returns an int, which is the value I'm interested in. In this case, how do I compute this? Well, I grab the current state of the battle, right, at the current phase. I compute the number of wounds based on the wounds taken by the player, and for each unit that the player owns, I add in the total of wounds taken for each unit to the total number of wounds I want to return, and I just return that value. And that's really it. It's another one where I only have like 20 lines of code to define the dynamic value specific to that particular use case. So how do I use this in the game? Well, not every effect supports dynamic values, right? And in my case, I want to increase the attack value based on the number of wounds. So I will look at the gain attack effect, and the method for getting attack here is get attack gain. Again, takes an effect param. And all I need to do is apply the attack value override, which is the dynamic value here, get the value using the passed in effect params, and create a new attack using that attack value. And if there is no dynamic value, I return the hard-coded one. Very, very simple. Let's have a look at what it looks like in the editor. So remember, I create my asset menu, so I can go to create effect value, and here I want number of wounds. So this creates a new scriptable object. I always prefix it with the type here that helps me sort them, and I call this number of wounds. Okay. And I can choose whether I include player or unit wounds dynamically. Then in my effect at the bottom, let's take this one, at the bottom, I can choose it has a default value of 1, which is the hard-coded one, or I can choose to drop in the number of wound dynamic value here. If we go back to a demo again, you can see that I set up the scene where I have the green goblin and 3 wounds. But I've removed the dynamic value, so it should default to the hard-coded value of 1. So when I apply the effect, I only do 1 damage, which is not enough to kill the goblin, which requires 2 damage. Alright, I put the effect back, I apply the number of wound dynamic value, then I apply the effect again, and now I can see the enemy is dead, and I did enough damage to kill the enemy. And same thing, I can delete it, drag and drop the effect again, and the enemy does not die. A cool thing you can do with this kind of dynamic values is you can compose them together. So if you remember earlier, I have the concept of an effect modifier in my dynamic value. So if I go back to the code, here I have effect modifier, which allows me to combine them with addition or multiplication. So that really allows me to have multiple attack values stacked up together. For instance, if I wanted to do you gain 2 times the number of wounds, or you get number of wounds plus 2 or something like this, this is what I would use. So how does that look like in the editor? So my value number of wounds, right? I could, instead of using this, I can create a new one called effect value, let's just say fixed. And I do value 2 times. And I take my value of 2, and I bring my wounds as the base value modifier, or I can choose the dynamic value modifier of 2 and multiply. So that would give me either a hard-coded value of 2 or a dynamic value of 2 multiplied by another dynamic value. So here 2 times the number of wounds, which should give me an attack of 6 instead of an attack of 3. Then I apply this into my effect. So now I have a super powerful attack, and I do 6 damage. I don't know if you can see on the video, but I do 6 damage on the goblin instead of 3. As you can see, scriptable objects are really powerful, and they can be used in many different ways to power your game business logic. And I found them great for non-programmers to tweak how the game works and how your magic or RPG cards or whatever player and enemy data impacts the game. So I hope you found these tips useful, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me grow the channel. I will keep posting more videos on scriptable objects and other general game programming tips. Thank you, and see you at the next one.